The courtroom was silent, filled with the tension of an unfolding drama. Seated at the plaintiff's table was Officer Daniel Carter, a decorated police officer who had served his city with unwavering dedication. But unlike most officers who entered this grand hall, Daniel had something that made him stand out. He was blind, and by his side, as always, was his trusted K9, Shadow, a black German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a fierce loyalty that could not be broken. This was no ordinary case. Daniel was fighting to keep his position in the police force. Despite years of service and countless heroic deeds, there were those who believed a blind officer had no place on the force. Among them was Judge Richard Collins, a man who had never held back his skepticism about what Daniel and his K9 were capable of. Judge Collins: "Officer Carter, while we all appreciate your service, we must ask ourselves, how can a blind man possibly continue as a police officer? This is not a storybook. Real life has limitations." A few chuckles echoed through the courtroom, but Daniel remained composed, gripping Shadow's harness tightly. A murmur spread through the audience, and Daniel felt his anger rise, but he kept his voice steady. "Daniel, Shadow and I are a team. We work together just like any other K9 unit. He doesn't replace me, he enhances me." Judge Collins leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Prove it," he said. Daniel looked taken aback. "Excuse me?" he replied. Judge Collins repeated, "You say you and your dog function as one unit. Show us!" Gasps filled the courtroom. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It had turned into a trial by fire. Daniel took a deep breath and said, "All right." The judge smirked, thinking he had backed the officer into a corner, but he had no idea what was coming. Daniel turned to Shadow and gave him a command. "Seek!" he said. Instantly, Shadow's ears perked up, and he began scanning the room. The judge looked unimpressed, but before he could make another remark, Shadow moved. In a flash, the German shepherd darted toward a man seated in the back of the courtroom. The man froze, panic flashing across his face as Shadow let out a low growl. Judge Collins demanded, "What's going on?" Daniel replied confidently, "Shadow found something." The courtroom watched in stunned silence as officers rushed toward the suspect. They searched him, and within seconds they found it, a concealed weapon. Gasps erupted from the audience. An officer announced, "Sir, this man is wanted for armed robbery. He slipped past security." Judge Collins's mouth fell open in disbelief. Daniel looked at the judge and asked, "Still think we can't do our jobs, Your Honor?" The judge was speechless. He looked from Daniel to Shadow, then back to the suspect being dragged out in cuffs. He cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Judge Collins stammered, I think I've seen enough." A moment of silence passed before the judge straightened up and said, "Officer Carter, your petition to remain on the force is not only granted, but I believe you and Shadow deserve a commendation for today's actions." Applause erupted in the courtroom. Officers, civilians, and even skeptics rose to their feet. Shadow wagged his tail, but his eyes remained fixed on Daniel, as if knowing he had just secured their future. As Daniel knelt beside his loyal partner, he whispered, "We did it, buddy." Shadow responded with a soft bark, as if to say, "We always do." And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood one thing. Courage isn't about what you can see. It's about what you believe in. Daniel Carter had proved that with his unbreakable bond with Shadow, he could do the impossible.